looking at your career, obviously Star Trek is the big one, but once you start looking deeper, I mean, going back to dinosaurs, which I
Oh,
think people
yeah.
forget just how groundbreaking something like that actually was. You did Spider-Man, you were Kraven the Hunter, Spider-Man just as a voice actor, Gargoyles. So I'm definitely very excited to chat with you and sort of pick your brain on a lot of stuff.
Cool.
Actually, let's start with dinosaurs. When
Okay.
in the 80s, you did a lot of work, TV shows, episodes here, there, and then you get a show like Dinosaurs, which is, I mean, totally out of left field. It's just something new. It was, I believe, TGIF originally.
Mhm.
What's sort of going through your mind? What are your expectations? Is it just like some wacky job that I'm taking, or was it exciting to feel like it might be a new direction where things might be moving in?
Well, it wasn't as exciting as you might think, just
Mhm.
because it was fun and I loved it. I mean, I thought it was a funny show, and what the idea that they had was very funny. Um, but at that point, I was doing quite a lot of voiceovers, and with voiceover actors, the ones who work a lot. I'm not one of those. There's a lot of guys who
Mhm.
there's a small cadre of guys that work all the time,
Mhm.
and to them, they go in, they do a job, and they leave. You know, and if it works out, great. If it doesn't, then great. They go on to the next one. So that's what it was, because it was only I only did 2 episodes for them,
Mhm.
and they liked the voice and they liked this kind of thing that
Mhm.
that I brought to the one of the characters. So they had me back for another character,
Mhm.
and and although the show was was very funny.
Mhm.
Um, when I left the second time, it was like, okay, thanks, guys. Okay, Michael, we'll see you later. And that was kind of it. So,
And that's sort of, yeah, yeah. And at that point, like you said, you go in, you do something, and then it's on to the next project.
so
And that's actually around the time, sort of shortly after that, that you did get Star Trek, where, you're getting put on this makeup and you're sort of becoming this character that doesn't
actually,
look
Star
like you.
Trek was before Dinosaurs.
Really,
Yes.
really, the gig that you had. Interesting,
Oh,
interesting. So, I mean, once you got on Star Trek at that point already, I mean, you were Worf. It became this whole thing. Not necessarily, I believe, with the first season. It's sort of something that grew. Uh, but you're still going off and doing voice acting. What's
yeah.
sort of the motivation? I mean, besides financial and being a professional actor and all that stuff, what's sort of the motivation from going to these different jobs and finding these different roles?
Well, well, first of all, it's a job, which
Hmm.
is very rare in this business. Not, I was very fortunate, but a lot of people aren't very fortunate. They work very little. Some people work a lot more than I do. Some people work as much as I do. So, work is work. That's the first thing. Um, it's a funny thing. You don't think, or let me put it, I don't think that it's going to turn into a lifelong job. Like, oh, this is going to be,
A
because
career.
we have well, or this is going to be a hit show and I'm going to do it
Yeah.
for 20 years. And, because there's a funny thing that happened on Star Trek a lot, is that whenever we get a guest actor, they'd come on the show and, hey, how you doing? And we talk and they said everything and say, oh yeah, they told me that this is probably going to turn into a reoccurring. And just about every guest actor said that. And we would just go, really? And we look at each other, and because it's just their way of trying to get the best actors. And if you can sweeten the pot by saying,
Yeah.
you know, so nobody, but the funny thing about voiceover is nobody ever said that to me. They never said, oh, this is going to be, they always said, hey, thank you, Michael, that was great. And then a week later or 2 weeks later, I get another call, oh, they want you to come back, oh, thank you. And I go in, I do it, leave, and then, that's kind of it. So it just was never uh, any other motivation except you're working,
Yeah.
which is always a big thing, because that means that, that your name is still out there.
Yeah. Well, you actually said something interesting. I read a quote when asked about doing Star Trek and, does it ever become monotonous to do a TV show? Is that something that you necessarily want to be this one character for so long? And your answer was really interesting. You said, how many other actors get to say they've worked this long and get to make 6 movies? And I feel that's sometimes lost, that that this character, it has become, so identifiable, so much, as other roles, maybe even more than other roles and other characters that people have portrayed.
Well, it's I don't really, or I didn't really think about that. Once again, it was about, you know, all of us were very fortunate that we had a job, that lasted, a long time because, you all of us were journeymen, as I like to call it. I mean, we were working actors. We had done things. We weren't household names like Will Wheaton or LeVar Burton. So, but we understood from the very start that, hey, you got a great job. You're going to make a little money. You can take it easy for, maybe a year or two after that,
Hmm.
and you don't have to worry. But that's kind of as far as we looked ahead. We didn't, and I know this because when I worked on a show many, many years ago, I had that same emotion, which was, oh, it's a network show. It's in the top 20. Oh, this is it. My career is made. I don't ever have to, think about it and that wasn't the case. And that's the way it is for everybody. Sometimes you get lucky, but most of the time you don't. So we don't, none of us really thought about it as, oh my God, this is, going to be iconic, or
Hmm.
this is going to last for, for 20 years or something like that. Nobody thought that. I didn't think that.
Yeah, and it's so strange to think about it now. Also, you mentioned it's a network show, and I feel we're getting to a point where generations now are not even going to know the cachet that that used to carry. Where if you have a network show, you're automatically, have the possibility to be exposed to so many millions of people. Where
Sure.
now we live in an era of Netflix and Amazon and HBO and all these cable channels, where when Star Trek Next Generation came out, it was sort of this niche sci-fi show on a network channel, whereas now it might be some trendy hot show on Netflix, which is aiming to be the mainstream show.
Well, the we were syndicated, so we were first run syndication, which means we weren't a network show. We were
Mm,
basically Paramount produced the show and filmed it, and they sold it to whoever wanted it.
mm,
So it wasn't a network show. They didn't get a network show until Voyager. I think Voyager was a network show for UPN, for the
okay.
UPN network. So it's a different, in a lot of ways, it's different because a network show is the sort of, the gold standard because
Yeah.
you get, you're on a network. It's well established. There's, the advertisers are there. It's like a machine. You get paid a lot more than you do in the syndicated because they didn't know what syndication was at that point. They didn't know
Hmm.
how it was going to look. So, but it wasn't a network show, and so once again, it was one of those things where, along with knowing that this may just end after 2 years, and not being a network show, we called ourselves this Saturday morning kids space show, you know,
Yeah, and
because
again,
because it was in science fiction in those days, it was still relegated to the back burner,
yeah. I
sort
mean,
of.
and this was late 80s. This was even before sort of the 90s where you had X-Files and all this
Oh,
stuff on
oh
Fox
my
where
God.
it sort of exploded.
Mhm.
And like I said, now you turn on Netflix and Star Trek is a kind of show that they would be banking their money on and
Oh yeah.
going for the trendy mainstream audience. And I mean, Star Trek Next Generation, it's one of those shows where it sort of elevated the sci-fi genre where it became more dramatic, more theatrical on television. And personally, I know people who are obsessed with it. I'm sure you come across it all the time at the conventions. One of my best friends actually has your face as Worf tattooed on his body. So, I'm sure that's kind of
I've
stuff
seen
that
that. I think well, there's somebody else. I don't know if it's your friend, but I've seen that.
really,
Yeah.
and and people just became so obsessed with it.
Mhm.
And when I ask him, about the different, there's the original Star Trek, Next Generation, Voyager. he doesn't watch the original Star Trek. Not a big fan. There's something about your version of the show, something about the way that it was done that resonated with audiences.
Mhm.
That and not necessarily just sci-fi audiences.
Mhm.
Uh, and you say you were a part of this show. You become, you were doing different shows. You come on this one, and it starts to blow up a little bit. And then what happens, because you were in the few actors who ended up going to Deep Space Nine. So what's it like, sort of building this family on Star Trek, and then sort of you have to start new again on this new show, except you're still carrying that old character.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't. You didn't have to start new. You didn't have to start anew. It was you were basically coming over there to help them, with the ratings and
Hmm.
all that type of stuff because the ratings weren't where they wanted it to be.
Hmm.
So it wasn't new. I was just continuing with Worf,
Yeah.
and the other players had to um, were basically we were all kind of trying to find whatever fit it was going to be.
Hmm.
Um, it was it was a really interesting time for a lot of reasons because um, two things. I love the challenge of it all because if I go over there and it doesn't work out, then I'm just an overpaid, you know, has been actor.
Yeah.
So it was really important for me to make it work, to be as solid as I could. And if it worked out, then great. I was the hero. Um, so it was a challenge, to kind of okay, see, what is this going to turn out to be? Luckily, it worked out, and everybody was happy. So
Yeah, I mean, there has to be some sort of level of confidence, sort of like Reggie Jackson coming into the Yankees, where you're swinging the big bat, you sort of need me right now. It's a different experience than when you first get on the
oh
the,
yeah.
the show and start developing this character. There had to be some sort of fun to that.
Well, the fun part was in this business when they call you and they want you. That is different than anything else because usually you're the one that's coming in there and auditioning and you want the job and you're signing the contracts and the contracts are all um, what's the word for it, benefit the
Hmm.
studio or the production company. They don't benefit you. And so my lawyer who's also a dear friend, he and I were salivating because um, you know, for the first time in your career, somebody's coming to you and going, "We want you. Let's see what we can do." And so you're in a pretty good position. I've never been one to sort of throw my weight around, and I don't believe in that stuff. So the only thing I was concerned about was them, keeping close to what Worf is and what he was and what made him a popular character and not try to stray on either side. Don't try to make him a hilarious guy or try to make him ironic, or anything like that. Just keep him who he is. And that's kind of the only thing that I really was you know strong about, or very clear about. But a person could go in there and throw their weight around, but I didn't. I was just it was a great. Um, I was very fortunate. I was extremely fortunate to go back to that.
And after so many years, I mean, anyone who's attempting, not just in the film industry, who's trying to make it, in
Yeah.
an industry that requires lofty sort of ambition and lofty goals, in the back of your mind, you're always thinking to anyone who doesn't want to work with you, it's like you'll see one day, I'm gonna keep trucking and trucking. Then you get to that moment where finally they call you. Is that where in the back of your mind you say, this was the moment all those years that I was waiting for?
Um, no, the thing that I was waiting for my whole career was the was the time where I could pick and choose the projects I want to do. Where I have the freedom, and that didn't happen until 10 years ago.
Hmm.
Uh, when you when Star Trek was over, although we did a lot of movies, all of us did quite a few movies in between. When it was over, you're back auditioning again, which means you're back in the pool, and that's where you have to start all over again. You have a little, you have a little cachet. People kind of know you, and they know where you are, and they know what you're doing. And sometimes you'll get a call that says, "Hey, we really want you to do this, this movie, and here's the offer, and will you do it?" But most of the time, it's back to the grindstone.
Yeah, and that feels like something that's different also now in the age of social media, where, as an actor, you can sort of show your own key performance indicators by saying, okay, here's how many followers I have, and this and so forth, which is something you couldn't necessarily do back then. Do you think that's maybe hurting or helping the situation?
You know, it's such
Because
a
a lot
it's
of people
it,
just get cast based on social media.
yeah, they do. They do. Um, how many followers do you have? Oh my God.
Uh,
And I'm sorry, but I just think it comes down to good writing and good acting and good casting. Yeah, you can you can never predict anything. You could have a guy with 1 million followers and it goes nowhere, or I mean, or there's a media darling who's doing this, but how does that translate to anything except maybe to advertising? But otherwise, it always comes down to a good story, um, some wonderful actors, and a good idea. You know, I mean, and
yeah.
the thing is that, and this is my point, is that they've always been trying to figure out the formula. How
Hmm.
can we do this to make a crap load of money? And very rarely does it happen, and most of the time it's accidental. Like when I just read an article about Sam Jackson, who took that first uh, uh, Nick Fury role,
Hmm.
and that wasn't. It was just one role. I mean, he was like, "Yeah, this is great," and all of a sudden he's done I don't know how many pictures. That's something that they didn't predict. They didn't know that that was going to be that way. And most of the stuff out there is things that have happened that have been unpredictable. The big um, blockbusters and are shows that nobody knew, was going to
Yeah, I mean,
work.
Johnny Depp was known as this avant-garde actor, and now all of a sudden he's the world's most famous pirate.
Oh my God!
It's
I mean,
it's it's crazy.
it's or Keanu Reeves in The Matrix.
Yeah.
I mean, no.
Although I feel there's something about TV shows though where there's more opportunity for that because you might have 1 million Instagram followers, but with a TV show you have to keep reinvesting into each episode.
Yeah,
It's not a 20-second clip on YouTube. It's something you have to keep coming back for, and whatever fan base you're growing won't be off of whatever silliness you're doing online. It'll be strictly based off of the product. So that's where I feel right now in an age where TV shows and movies are sort of blending. TV shows still sort of, you have to keep coming back for, I mean, it used to be 20 some odd episodes. Now every show, it seems like it's 10 episodes a season, but you still have to come back. And, by episode 3, you're going to forget about what you saw on Instagram or Facebook. You're just thinking about the plot of that show.
I mean, how many episodes can you do about cute cats?
Yeah.
It's like okay, and I think that everybody's just grasping, trying to find some formula. When they just find a great script and a good idea and film it.
Yeah.
That's the best you can do. So
Just to experiment. And that's why I think a lot of people are against Netflix because of what they're doing to sort of the film industry. But at the same time, who else is experimenting the way these platforms
oh
are
yeah,
experimenting right now?
and the thing is that the film industry was very closed. I mean, it was for a long time. I mean, there used to be a time when there was three networks. There used to be a time where, if you weren't at 20th Century Fox or MGM or or Warner Brothers, then you're not making movies. So I think that having so many platforms has opened it up, and I'm happy about that because that means a lot of actors are working. You
Yeah.
know, they may not be making network money, or they may not be making,
Hmm.
like, $20 million a picture, but they're working, and
Yeah.
people binge on the shows. People like the shows. Hey, I mean, I'll be sitting around with my friends, and they'll mention 5 or 6 shows that they binge on, that they watch religiously, and I've never heard of them.
Yeah.
And that's
It
not bad. That's not bad. That's perfectly fine.
it's sort of become like with music where everyone has like these three bands they listen to that you've never heard of, and
Never
that's what
heard of
TV shows are now.
it.
And to think that so much of it is going on, and you didn't really have that before because,
Yeah. No.
there was always, what was it, September, you get the new lineup of shows, and then, there's the summer break, and now it's just constant influx of stuff happening.
No.
And you mentioned, yeah, it might be less money, but I think back to Sopranos, which now it's this huge monster. But back then, a show on HBO, no one knew what it was going to be. It wasn't like having something on NBC or on CBS. And now we know every actor's name on that show.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
So quality gives you the opportunity to sort of amplify your
And
your
also,
message.
going to cable, you can take more risks
Hmm.
than you can on network shows. Networks are very tight, and they're very sort of like, okay, no, we can't do this, we can't do this, and HBO was the first one that went, whoa, what was that?
Yeah. Well, it's not TV, it's HBO.
Yeah, it's not TV, and
Yeah.
so I
And
think
that's
it's all good. The only thing that I I don't have an issue with any of it. I'm just happy that other actors are working.
mhm.
There's an
Yeah.
opportunity where if you have a great idea, or you think you have a great idea, there's an outlet for it.
Yeah.
Where before, 3 networks, just the studios, that was it. You know,
Yeah. And it's true. We've sort of gotten used to the way you see in movies with cursing and nudity and not necessarily just for gratuitous reasons, but just to show a reflection of reality, how people talk and live. We become so accustomed to it that I'm fascinated looking back at certain shows. Star Trek's one of them. I mentioned X-Files, other genres. You look at Miami Vice in the 80s, which I felt was very groundbreaking and not a shocker that Michael Mann went on to do what he did. And those shows did have to work with certain restrictions with the FCC, with commercial breaks and all that stuff. And again, the fact that 20 some odd episodes a season, season after season.
6.
Yeah,
We
and the
did 26.
quality, the staying power, working within all those limitations. Do you feel maybe it forced more quality writing, it forced more quality acting? It sort of pushed everyone more knowing that you had to work in those limitations.
Oh, in the old days.
Yeah.
Oh, I think that it wasn't. I don't think that it was about quality. I think that there was kind of a Hollywood machine that was going on, where it was, since it was so closed, they only hired the best writers. They only hired the writers that were doing incredible work, or they came from Broadway, or whatever the case, or they're authors, or what, Michael Crichton, for instance,
Hmm.
Mario Puzo with The Godfather. um, and now it's a lot different, because there's so much out there that that they're trying to find as much content as they can, as much material as they can. And so I think it's kind of watered down a little bit. There's a lot of shows that rise to the surface as
Hmm.
anything. But I mean, I think that if I had an issue with any of this, it's just the idea that, oh God, I forgot what I was going to say. Um, oh, well, I'm not going to try to think of it now. Anyway, but if I think about it, I'll say it.
Yeah. In terms of the acting side of it, because you have the unique perspective of, when the camera's rolling and you get to see everyone when the cameras are cut. The audience doesn't. So you get to see the transformation that not just you go through, but sort of all the other actors go through. Who blew you away the most in terms of just transforming from who they are day to day to who you saw them on the screen? Do you ever get shocked sort of when you're acting with someone?
No, no, not really. The one thing that I did seed that I thought was interesting was not about transformation, but you could see why a person is a star.
Mm-hmm.
Because I worked with a couple of stars, and I was acting with them, and I go, I see why that person's a star. There's a certain quality that comes across, and if you're fortunate enough to be able to do a lot of movies and hone that craft, and it's just second nature to you. But transformations, no. I mean, people are funny.
Yeah.
Um, they can be playing a very serious role, and the camera's cut, and they are hilarious. You know, and that to me was really difficult because all of a sudden I can't watch them anymore. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, here they go, and they're acting now. And but but that's the only kind of transformation. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's you know,
And you also you had this sort of, obviously we've heard many times you talk about the process of putting all the makeup and all that stuff, and I'm sure it can get very frustrating and annoying to have to do that. But does it help sort of transform into a character, sort of, you know, I don't want to say rely on something because, all of it still has to come from you. But is it something that you know in the back of your mind, well, now because I look different, I can be different?
no, not at all. In fact, uh, for for me, I'll just speak to
Hmm.
myself. I'm not going to talk about other actors or try to talk for them. But for me, it's always a dream come true because you can do whatever you want to do because you're hidden,
Hmm.
and so you can create this character and make him do anything you want him to do because you're behind a mask,
Yeah.
and it becomes uh, not easy, but it becomes a real welcome challenge. And so uh, the makeup, I said, oh God, I feel terrible. Oh, I feel like Worf. I never thought that. It was coming from the inside. I was going, okay, I'm going to make this character da 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 da, and make him this, make him that. And I never really thought about the makeup
Hmm.
helping with that. I do know that people thought I was kind of gruff and surly because the makeup never moves, and so I always had this perpetual scowl on my face.
Hmm.
But I was just sort of like sitting there. But otherwise, no. I think other actors feel the same way. I think some probably say, "Oh, I wasn't that character until I put on the makeup." But for me, no. I was the character, and you know, the makeup was just a mask.
Hmm. And when you build a character up, whether it's, it was Worf or a voice for a certain project, are there any characters, movies, actors that you sort of look to that inspired you when you were coming up or when you were a kid that you say, that's sort of the energy that I want to carry into this?
No, I love old actors. I mean, I know just about all of them, and over the years, there are actors that I consider super interesting. Um, but um, I never thought about them as like, oh God, well, that's what I want to do. I only thought about them as like, wow, that was interesting,
Hmm.
and that okay, whatever I do, I'm going to make it interesting. I always thought Gene Hackman was a fabulous actor. Interesting choices. I think Sam Waterston from Law and Order, super.
Hmm.
I mean, he should have won an Emmy for every year he was on Law and Order. I mean, it was just. Um, but you can't be those people, and you can't bring who they are or what you see to your performance at all. Uh, you can do it, and I played with it one time. There was one time that Patrick and I were talking about Sir Laurence Olivier and the way that he always spoke. And I tried it one time with Worf, and I had to loop it. I had to overdub it later on in post because the producers are going, "What were you thinking?"
And that's
And,
something you also only have the opportunity to do because it's a long-running TV show. So you get to revisit the character and you're always there. And there gets to be a point of just experimenting and playing around.
yep. So, but but no, I find there was a lot of actors I worked with who were super interesting, who were super good, and you really loved it. But nobody I said, oh, I want to be like John Wayne, or I want to have that type of thing. I mean, I'd love to have that clout that he has, where
Yeah.
that's the one great thing is to be able to work in your craft. And if you're doing really well and you're well in demand, then you are working constantly and honing your craft at the same time. It's great.
Yeah. Well, again, John Wayne is John Wayne, but your face is tattooed on people's bodies. So
Yeah.
it's very fascinating. I mean, it's great, but it's almost a little cultish how people get behind the show, and Star Trek is one of those where, I mean, you look at the conventions. Star Trek is one of the reasons why they are what they are now. It's almost its own industry. Uh, and playing Worf, you got to be behind this sort of mask when you get recognized. I'm sure super diehard fans recognize you, uh, but do you get recognized by not necessarily the people who can speak Klingon?
um, it goes in waves. There was a time when I was not recognized at all. Then there's a time when I was recognized a bit, and now it's only from the diehard fans. But I also get recognized from other work that I've done.
Hmm.
So that is pretty good.
Yeah, you also, because now I want to switch over. You built these characters, and then you got the opportunity to direct and work behind the camera.
Mhm.
What sort of led you to that?
I always wanted to be a director. That's why I got in the business. And every I started out just shadowing people on the sitcom a good friend of mine was working on, and that's what I wanted to do. And I would always say, well, I'll take this job and then I'll make some money and then I'll start directing. And I fell in love with acting anyway, but so I just kept kind of working, and it kind
Hmm.
of kept getting put off and put off. Interestingly enough, the funny thing is that's a great thing now about the way the business is that there's so many things out there. They need directors,
Hmm.
there's so many directors, you
Yeah.
know, and
Plus,
so
you definitely have a unique experience because you said you sort of came up where it was this machine sort of industry,
oh, oh,
and the only way to me, it just sounds like sort of the Nashville music machine, where it's just
oh
a well-oiled machine.
yeah, and everybody kind of knew everybody else, and you it was very if you worked at MGM, then the people at 20th Century Fox knew you, and you can go from there to there, and
Hmm.
it was very interesting. I wouldn't say better or worse or anything like that.
Hmm. It's just
Just
different, yeah. I mean, was because it was so much, I don't want to say smaller, but so much more closed off. It would sort of felt like its own club where there's sort of like alliances and rivalries. Like,
sure.
well, there's the Star
Oh,
Trek group and there's the Battlestar Galactica group, and we're better than them,
mhm,
and sort of just meeting other shows and the relationships that build that way.
mhm. No, I don't. I think that is a small part of it. I don't think
Hmm.
that there is. I mean, people kind of laugh and talk about it and joke about it, but I think we're all kind of in the same boat. You
Just
know,
happy to be a
still,
part of something.
still, gosh, even after Star Wars, there still wasn't the uh, the sort of big
Mhm.
blockbusters that are out there. I mean, I was watching a trailer in a movie theater, and it was the Marvel superhero or something
Hmm.
like that, and they had all of the Marvel actors running at you, in a very dramatic way. I think there was like 20 people.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know who these people are. I mean, it's like, and that is a machine, and and not so much Star Wars or Star Trek, but all these other science fiction shows have
Hmm.
brought science fiction to the front.
Yeah. Well, Star Trek now is also they're relaunching the shows, and you might be sort of,
I know
a big part of that.
I know what I'm going to say. The issue I had with all the platforms that are out there now,
Mm.
especially with cable, is that they have to they have to be more and more and more than the last show. So if it's a dark show, they got to be darker. And if it's a show that's sort of like semi pornography, they got to
Yeah.
push it even further, you know. And so it becomes less about the story and more about how far can we push this? Because if you don't push it far enough, then you're just sort of like pablum, you know, you're basically
Yeah.
not really, you know, passe, you know, you got to push the envelope constantly. And sometimes, you know, you're watching the show and you're going, why did they do that? Where did that come from? Because they have to push the envelope.
Yeah,
And
I definitely see that because there's shows, and obviously we're all at this point a little bit desensitized to nudity and violence, but I'll be watching a show with my wife, my family, and there's a love scene, and then it just goes on for like 20 seconds too long, where everyone's just sort of sitting there looking at their watch. It's like, what are we actually watching here right now? And I think that's something, like you said, it's
yeah,
because you keep going further and further that you don't really stop and think, well, is this beneficial to the project that we're doing?
no, I think most of it is gratuitous. I think that if there is something, you know that it's, and you're not looking at your watch, you're going, oh man, what's going on? And you know,
Yeah.
this is interesting or whatever the case, where, you know, a lot of times, like I said, they just get darker and darker and darker and more vicious and more, if it's about a murder, they have to just, and to me, sometimes it gets to be funny, you know, when it gets so dark, it starts to be comical, you know,
Yeah.
because instead of cutting the head off, they have to cut the arms off. They have to, you know, and then blood has to, you know, and you go, oh, you know, and I'm like going, pretty funny.
Yeah, I was talking to a writer who works on a lot of these I don't even know if it's Sci-Fi Channel movies anymore, but like the ridiculous, eight-headed monster versus shark eight-headed monster. And he was telling me, a movie like Rosemary's Baby, you'd have to show the baby today. You can't get
Oh,
away with that. He was flat out told in the first 5 seconds you have to have something massive happen. You can't just sort of build it up. You have to start off with that, you know, the
now,
eight-headed monster bites off the other
yeah.
monster's head or something.
Now I mean, now I like, now, for instance, I always think my theory or the thing that I like, what gets me about movies, if they get me in the first 15 minutes, I'm there. You
Hmm.
know, it's like if you catch me in the first 15 minutes, then I'll stay with you
Hmm.
unless you just get ridiculous. But if you catch me in the first 15 minutes, then I'm there. And the one of the best first 15 minutes was, I don't know if it was 15, maybe been 10, was the first Matrix movie.
Hmm.
Now, that to me was part of the story. It was part of the thing where you're showing, you know, you're kind of setting this world up and you're not just throwing something out there.
Hmm.
And that's a big difference.
I even
But,
feel something a movie like that right now would be considered.
sorry, what?
I feel even a movie like that right now would be considered sort of a slow burn, if you can
Oh,
even say.
well, you know, and I got to tell you, funny, my cousin's daughter and her husband watched, it may have been one of the Star Trek movies. I think it was. And at the end of it, you know, my cousin goes, so what do you guys think? I said, there's a lot of talking. And that's where we are right now.
Yeah.
I mean, you watch these movies and it's loud and it's coming at you and it's constant.
Yeah.
You know,
Camera's constantly moving
oh,
everything.
oh boy, it's, you know, and I feel like an old timer, like, God, these darn kids, you know, because I watched I think it was the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie. And it was loud. And I was like going, wow. And, you know, it just, and I was with some kids and they were, they were right there. And
Hmm.
the minute that stopped, they kind of went and were kind of looking down. And then something happened again. They were there. And
Yeah,
I think
it's
that's
weird. It's a weird phenomenon, the way
always
we're conditioned now for media, especially with cell phones and everything. It's
well, you just have to make it even darker or bigger,
yeah.
faster. You know,
And
like
your Star Trek was a very cerebral
was.
show, and the funny part is when it came out, there was the argument, the MTV sort of generation, where the music video style of editing, where they were saying everything was cut too fast back then, everything's too moving too fast back then, and now it just keeps getting faster and keeps getting faster to a point where, I mean, where is it going? You
Mm.
know, I was talking to some cinematographers, and they said they don't even know what their field is necessarily anymore, because once it goes into post with CGI and everything, it's sort of like that's where the movie is made now, and it's just whatever they want in their imagination, just throw it on screen digitally.
The good thing that I think about our fans is that it is if it's Star Trek. I mean, if it has the Star Trek stamp on it, they're happy with it. You know, which is uh, they love the kids love the visual
Hmm.
part of it, but our fans still love the relationships. They enjoy that, and so you just have to find a happy medium with that stuff. But you know, like I think it was the second movie. I forgot the third movie, but not only was there a ship that was, or these bad guys that were killing people, they were killing universes. You know, and you
That's
go,
crazy.
they're killing universes. Yeah, they're destroying universes. Really, whole systems. That's big. You know.
Well, that's sort of Star Trek's way of one-upping Star Wars. You had the Death Star. It's like destroying planets. That's
Yeah.
to 1977.
You know, I got to tell you, my one of my favorite movies was Rogue One because it was exciting. It was great story, lovely actors, all that type of stuff. And the Death Star was used very sparingly. No, just destroy the city. No, just destroy the facility. I mean, they weren't like, and that's the one thing that I think that we're missing now is that you don't have to do that. You know, you
Yeah, to
don't
tease a
have to
little bit.
get big. You don't have to get, instead of having, 20 ships fighting, you have 300, you know, uh, you can have 10 ships and still have the same,
Yeah,
excitement.
yeah.
But yeah,
That
it's gone. I don't know where it's going to go, but the good thing is that there's so many platforms that, my hope is that I'll be doing something that I love and I'm passionate about, and
Well, storytelling is such a natural thing to humans, and it's such an old form, one way or another, that I feel eventually it'll all come back to the stuff that's worked. I mean, more or less, we're still doing Shakespeare,
oh yeah,
one way or another. So what works works. And in terms of Star Trek, I mean, just today I read they're launching a cartoon, or they want to launch the cartoon.
you know.
So it's starting to, after all these years, it feels like only now is it really building into something even bigger.
Well, I think that there's levels
Hmm.
of this business. There's the top level, which is the big movies. Huge, huge, huge budgets, big actors on it. And then there's another level of the kind of medium movies. You know, they have, they're 20, $30 million. They're doing really well. Then there's another level, which is the low budget movies or the movies without the studio system or whatever
Hmm.
the case. And, all three are doing really good stuff. None of it is bad. It's just that I think that it's not going to come around as much as it's still there, and it's always been there. It's just been in a different level.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't.
Well, everything changes. I mean, even this format, the podcast format, I feel it's the same way people used to look at the Tonight Show, before Johnny Carson, when it was still just experimental. You had, Jack Parr and all that stuff. Uh, and and that's something you were mentioning, the length and not showing so much, I saw something interesting where with the Tonight Show, it always used to be, the late shows, you watch the whole program. Now it feels like everything is designed not to be watched that evening, but the next day, the clips, the sort of 2 minute clip, the 5 minute clip, where it's almost like the 2 hour original show is irrelevant. It's all about what can we pull out of this and make trendy online the next day? And are we going to get to that point with movies as well, where attention spans can't just sit for 2 hours, where it's going to be watch this scene. This is the one where the universe gets gobbled up.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's already happening. Um, but I think that there's always going to be a place for whatever you like. I think that's one good thing about it is that you can see whatever you want to see on
Hmm.
television, or in the movies or whatever the case. If you want to go see, especially on television now with the big screens and all that type of stuff, you can watch anything you want, you know.
Hmm.
And so there is no rhyme or reason, or there is no thing where you have to, okay, we got to do what they do, because it just doesn't work like that anymore, which is fine. I think it's just a product of the technology, and a product of a bit of greed, is always thrown in a little bit. Um, but I don't think it's like I said, I don't think it's bad. I think it's just a transition that we're going
Hmm.
through. But if I want to watch movies without any science fiction or without any CGI, you can see a ton of those.
Oh yeah.
Just a ton. I mean, I get the yeah, in fact, friends of mine get the screeners, the for the
Hmm.
Screen Actors Guild and for the Academy, and a lot of those movies are no CGI whatsoever. They're just all stories, or so there's always a place for there always will be a place. There'll be a place for podcasts. There'll be a place for animation. There'll be a place for all of it. So
Yeah, I definitely feel the audience is sort of like that silent majority where they still want what they've always wanted, because with the Academy Awards, they just came out and said that they're not going to be presenting the cinematography award and the editing award the way they traditionally have, and everyone exploded. You look at social media, everyone's going crazy. Even people who aren't like myself, like the big film geeks, everyone's just sort of complaining about it. And it sort of seems like there's that disconnect between, what the audience are still clamoring for and what like you said, they're like, well, let's just push it further, let's do this, let's do that, instead of just sort of seeing what's working and what people are naturally gravitating
yeah,
towards.
yeah. Well, I think that that's Alexa. Um, I think that it truly is one of those things where they have people in the business who are there to figure out what people want, and they're paid a lot of money, and in the end, they haven't got a clue, because nobody can predict. It just
Yeah,
doesn't work like that.
I don't
Just
know if you
doesn't
saw,
work.
there's a great sort of little thing that Frank Zappa once said about why there was so much great music coming out in the 60s.
Mhm.
And he said because the record label execs at the time were these big fat old guys with cigars in their mouths who just wanted to make money, who heard this music and they said, I don't know what this is. Let's record it. If the kids like it, we'll make money. We'll be happy. So they
Mhm.
would record all this music not knowing what it is. And then what happened was someone said, well, let's hire one of these hippies. Let's hire these kids to tell us what's cool. And then these kids grew up into these executives. And then they said, I know what they want because I was that person.
Mhm.
But ultimately, you can't know what someone wants. You just have to sort of say, I don't know why people like it, but you know what? If they like it, let's put it out there.
I mean,
Let's experiment.
my favorite. There's two favorite anecdotes. Is Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Hmm.
It's $5 million movie. Made $300 million.
Oh, it became a phenomenon.
Phenomenal. And the Blair Witch Project.
We're
You know,
still seeing copycats of the Blair Witch Project.
I
The
mean,
sort of that found footage, and movies did the found footage thing before that. There was Cannibal Holocaust, but there was something about the way that movie did it where now it's a genre.
and you know
You
what?
know?
And the people that made the movie had no clue. They were just making a movie. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. And
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 I remember the whole thing around it where people were asking, like, is it real? Isn't it real? It became a phenomenon.
yeah, and you're going, and so we can always try to figure out what people want.
Hmm.
But you can always, I mean, you can do pretty good within a genre. You know, if you're doing a Star Trek movie, you got it. There's Kirk, there's Spock, there's
Hmm.
Enterprise. You got that. Um, but if you're out there just making a movie, the best thing to do is to just to write it, be passionate about it, love it, and film it.
Yeah.
And the rest of it, you just don't know.
And
You can.
and you speak as someone who at heart wants to direct, and that was originally your motivation.
Mhm.
I mean, in terms of having worked in the industry as much as you have, and seen all these different projects and seen the evolution from sort of television and cinema into the digital age, if you would go out now to sort of direct a project, what sort of direction would you be pulled towards?
Oh God.
Genres or different styles?
I'm a big Quentin Tarantino fan.
Hmm.
So I like his. He doesn't really have a genre, you know.
Yeah, he
So
has fun.
and I like that. That if that's a genre, that's the genre that I'd be in.
Mhm.
I think that his stuff is just phenomenal.
Oh yeah, and
And
his name was tied to a Star Trek movie.
it's what?
His name was tied to a Star Trek movie. There's been rumblings that he's going to be working on a Star Trek movie, and a lot of people are getting freaked out. Oh, they don't want to see Pulp Fiction in space, but they forget the person who made Pulp Fiction, the person who made Kill Bill, is someone obsessed with movies. When he was making those movies, he knew he was making those movies. So I feel there needs to be some trust in filmmakers, which people are also afraid. I'm sure it's the same thing happens with actors, where with typecasting, where the person who made Pulp Fiction might make one of the greatest sci-fi movies also, because the movies that inspired him to make the sci-fi movies aren't necessarily the same movies that inspired Reservoir Dogs.
Well, I think that, and once again, we put the cart before the horse uh,
Hmm.
with a lot of these projects. Is that the goal is to make a fortune?
Hmm. Yeah.
That's the goal. So, and the other stuff, yeah, we can get actors, yeah, we can get
It's like, do
cinema.
we have the toys ready?
But are we going to make a million? Are we going to make $100 million? And but I mean, he has a great track record. I mean, why not? I don't, you can't. But I think that the genre that I like is sort of the an amalgamation of everything I've seen when I was growing up. The gangster movies,
Hmm.
the westerns, the Godfather movies. It's all an amalgamation, and I actually don't have a genre that I sort of lean towards. Although a director that I respect very very much said that she felt that romantic comedies were my thing, and I actually wrote and filmed a little bitty romantic comedy a
Hmm.
while ago. It was my first little foray into that stuff, and it was rough, and you know could have been funnier, but you learn, and but that's kind of the genre. I like that, um, but I don't have. It's just a matter of what I'm passionate about at the time. So I don't have a genre.
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean,
science
it's all a
fiction,
reflection of life to some degree, every genre.
I wouldn't say science fiction. I mean, no, I wouldn't say science fiction. I love science fiction. I've always loved science fiction since I was a kid, but I wouldn't say that that's what I was gravitating towards.
It's interesting you say romantic comedy, because a lot of people shy away from it, but obviously, it's such a popular genre, and the reason is we all enjoy it because we all sort of live it. That to some degree we all have relationships in our lives, and with the good comes the bad, and with the bad comes to funny, and it's become sort of a running gag where guys don't like The Notebook. They just use that movie, to impress whoever they want to be with.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, we enjoy these movies. I mean, someone's watching these movies,
Right.
So I'm curious to see the evolution, and I'd love to see, the romantic comedy that your brain would sort of put out there. I'm sure everyone else would
Oh,
also.
I already wrote it, and it's basically the log line is even old black people need love too. Uh,
See, that's something where I feel the best material has a ring of honesty to it, where it feels like someone's just being honest,
mhm.
and that sounds like an honest statement where it's both trying to be funny and B trying to relay something.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's definitely a story there.
The interesting thing is that hopefully, depending on what happens this year, with all these platforms, there may be a place for it. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
And that's the thing we're seeing, they say risks. I don't see it as risk. I see it as, you got to make a lot of movies, A movie like Taxi Driver was a risk, just
God-
make movies, experiment, try it. There's
Godfather,
audiences out there.
Godfather was a risk.
Godfather, yeah, because what I think Robert Evans, what he said when he was producing, he said, "I want to smell the spaghetti on screen," because up until that point, a majority of the Italian gangster movies were cast with a lot of Jewish actors, and he said, "I want an Italian director. I want something authentic in this movie to capture that." And no one knew what it was going to be. They
Mhm.
didn't want Al Pacino in that movie. They wanted someone
They
like
didn't,
Robert Redford.
they didn't want Brando.
Yeah,
They were like no. They were like no. You know,
yeah,
and
and the fact is, audiences are out there. I think we're all open to stories. So it was a pleasure chatting with you
good.
about it, and
Right.
and at the end of the day, we're all film geeks. We're all a part of this because there's something about it where uh, I think it was a Winston Churchill quote. I saw it online, so it has to be true.
It's got to be true.
Never quit anything that you can't go a day without thinking about.
Yeah.
So this is something we definitely think every day about. Thank you so much for
All
chatting
right.
with me. I can't wait for everyone to hear this because you know just to geek out, you talk about Tarantino and all that stuff and romantic comedies. I think it's very good for everyone to start talking more about what they like to watch and what they enjoy because it is all just a communal experience, and we're losing that a little bit with
Yeah.
everyone in their cell phone watching a movie. So let's chat more about it. Let's talk more about it.
Cool.
So
All right.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.